modest gains are being made to repel the Islamic State. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has just announced on national television the liberation of Tikrit.
نفذت إعدامات بحق صحفيين آخرين سيما في الموصل وتكريت.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we've been tracking this week. Risky business in Baghdad and beyond. Journalism in Iraq, where ISIL is far from the only danger for reporters. The uniform is gone, but when it comes to dealing with the media, Thailand's leader is still barking out the orders. Nepalis have an issue with the coverage of the earthquake. It's with their neighbors in India. And the shrinking world of journalism, the growing world of PR, and its effect on one newsroom in Los Angeles. Talk about perilous assignments for journalists these days, and the first countries that come to mind are places like Syria, Ukraine, or Somalia. But Iraq, which was a burial ground for media workers in the years immediately after the invasion in 2003, remains one of the most dangerous countries to report from. 5 reporters were killed there last year, second only to Syria, and once again, conditions are growing worse. Another reporter was killed last week on World Press Freedom Day when a car bomb that ISIL has claimed responsibility for took the life of Ammar al-Shahbander. He was with the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. That was not a targeted killing, but last month, Ned Parker, the Baghdad bureau chief for Reuters, fled the country after his life was threatened, he said, for his reporting on a story involving ISIL. However, those threats did not come from the ISIL side of the story. They came from supporters of the government. The Reuters journalist was also identified by a reporter on a local TV channel. Reason enough in Iraq these days to pack your bags and head to the airport. But leaving Iraq is not an option for everybody, and countless local journalists are caught between various factions competing for power. With intimidation comes the chill. All those news stories that should get reported but don't. Our starting point this week is Baghdad.
Journalists continue to face dangers. There's a culture of impunity. We've seen deaths, we've seen attacks, we've seen kidnappings.
It depends on whether the journalist is viewed as being friendly or biased towards one group or another.
It's about controlling the messaging. So it's very difficult to try and find the truth of what's happening.
His life was one of 17 lost to a pair of car bombs that ripped through Karada in the heart of Baghdad. Ammar al-Shahbander worked for an NGO that specializes in conflict zones, training journalists there.
The greatest impact he will leave is both on civil activism as well as the media work he was dedicated to. Unfortunately, he is just one of many colleagues who have been killed.
He was a mentor to a number of young journalists here in Iraq. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. It goes to show you that the security situation here in Iraq can affect anybody. But it's just the death of another person here in Iraq. And, 1,500 people died last month.
In that sense, it's symbolic that everybody faces these dangers in Iraq, not just its journalists.
According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 15 media workers have been killed in Iraq since the start of 2013. Most were targeted. Ned Parker of Reuters says he did not want to be number 60. On April 3rd, Parker filed a story from Tikrit on government-backed forces recapturing the city from ISIL. Iraqis who took issue with his report went on Facebook, threatening his life. And what followed on an Iraqi TV channel called Al-Ad led Parker to conclude he was no longer safe. After a decade of covering Iraq, he left the country.
Here was the liberation of Tikrit, a major city, the most significant victory that the Iraqi forces have achieved against ISIS. And the reporting that came about it was focusing mainly on the transgressions that happened on the battlefield. But by and large, I think the reporting itself did not focus on any positive events that were happening with the liberation of the city, and rather focusing on the negative aspects.
In Tikrit, the big question was, what would those Shia-dominated groups do once they'd recaptured parts of Sunni heartlands, how would they act? And this was the time at which the Reuters report came in, that a Reuters journalist witnessed the impromptu execution of a suspected ISIS soldier in the streets, and that hundreds of houses had been burnt in Tikrit. And so this really touched a nerve.
It was just showing what had happened, and there were revenge attacks being taken place. Reuters decided to run that. What happened was on a TV channel, Ned Parker, who was the Reuters bureau chief, was singled out. He was declared persona non grata for Iraq and for this TV channel in particular.
The gravest threat to journalists in Iraq remains the one posed by ISIL, not the indiscriminate attacks like the car bomb that killed Ammar al-Shahbander, but targeted killings and kidnappings. According to figures compiled by the CPJ just last month, more than 20 Iraqi media workers remain missing or are known to have been abducted by the group. ISIL still holds significant territory in the country, and journalists know that to go there amounts to risking their lives for a story the militants clearly want told their way.
ISIS has targeted journalists who are Iraqis and non-Iraqis. There is a lot of killing also on the identity of the journalist if he happens to be from a group ISIS considers to be a target, Shia or Kurd.
ISIL have a very smart media operation, and they use their own journalists, their own social media networks. They have a TV channel that they're trying to set up or have set up in Mosul. And for them, journalists are a nuisance because journalists want to look for the facts. And that's really what this is about.
Iraq's minister in charge of security summoned journalists to a meeting late last month, blaming the media for some of the government's setbacks in the fight against ISIL. Mohammed al-Gaban reportedly told gathered reporters most of the security collapses were due to psychological warfare, and that the media has a major role in creating this feeling among the people.
What the minister is speaking to is that since 2003, we've had a tremendous proliferation of non-state media. We've gone from 2 state channels to over 100 different channels across Iraqi TV. These, what are sometimes called ethno-sectarian media empires, these channels which reflect different interest groups within Iraqi society, also reflect power bases, and as power bases, they have guns and they have influence.
And because of this busy market, many inexperienced journalists have joined the industry and are broadcasting news that is sometimes unprofessional. So those claims do hold water, because there are news agencies that are disruptive and others that misinform or fabricate news. Many viewers have become disgruntled because they consider this media coverage as a conduit for the support of terrorism.
There are several outlets that, even though they are not praising ISIS, but by reporting on the perceived causes for ISIS success, criticizing the government, almost as giving a hint that there is a rationale for the existence of ISIS, or even the support for ISIS.
So, whilst there are dangers to journalists, you can't put this media back in the box. It's simply too diverse to just shut down.
When Iraq was invaded in 2003, a sectarian war was unleashed. The factions fighting on the ground have since taken their battle to the airwaves. The government, ISIL, and others all want to control the story, and some will kill journalists to get that control. For Iraqis, having all those new channels and freedom of the press doesn't amount to much when you don't know who or what to believe. On the download this week, our viewers on the state and the dangers of journalism in Iraq. Other media stories that are on our radar this week. The earthquake that devastated Nepal has garnered plenty of media coverage, which is critical given how much humanitarian aid is required. But many Nepalis are taking issue with some of the coverage in media outlets based next door in India. The hashtag #GoHomeIndianMedia has been retweeted tens of thousands of times. Chief among their complaints has been a tendency to emphasize India's role in the relief efforts and, in particular, the personal involvement of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Hindi channel Aaj Tak ran a segment with a title that translated to "Your pain is my pain." Modi's face was all over it.
सबसे पहले हाथ बढ़ाया हमारे प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी.
And on ABP News, Modi was lauded as the protector of the Nepali people. In a tweet, an executive editor at India's CNN-IBN network hit back at the critics, saying sections may have overhyped India's role, but the focus was never away from the tragedy. Somalia is one of the most dangerous countries in the world for journalists, and a radio producer is the latest to lose his life there. The murder took place in the city of Baidoa. Armed men broke into the home of Dawood Ali Omar May 1st, killing him and his wife. Omar worked for Radio Baidoa, a privately owned station with links to the government. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but local journalists suspect al-Shabaab. That's what Al Jazeera and other news outlets call the group, but the Somali government has issued an order to local journalists not to use the name al-Shabaab, but instead refer to, quote, the group that massacres the Somali people. As the chairman of the Somali Independent Media Houses Association told Al Jazeera, the change in terminology puts our lives in greater risk. We have to be neutral. We are independent journalists. Even the international media calls them al-Shabaab. If the government doesn't go back on this decision, many journalists will stop working. Roughly 18 months after its launch, Al Jazeera America, or AJAM, has replaced its CEO. Ihab al-Shahabi, who presided over the launch of AJAM back in 2013, will be replaced by the managing director of Al Jazeera English, Al Anstey. Al Jazeera America was making news prior to Wednesday's announcement after a number of high-profile departures. Marcy McGuinness, who was the senior VP of Outreach at AJAM, joined two other senior executives on the way out the door. McGuinness then went public through the New York Times, where she was critical of al-Shahabi's management style. AJAM is also facing a wrongful dismissal suit by a former employee, which the channel has said it will contest. Anstey, who is British, started his career with the American network CBS. He has also spent time at Reuters and the Associated Press. The channel he inherits has a challenge to boost ratings, with current nightly figures reaching around 30,000, according to surveys conducted by Nielsen, numbers that fall behind networks like Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. A year ago this month, there was big news coming out of Bangkok when the Thai army overthrew the government of Yingluck Shinawatra. It was the 12th coup d'etat since the modern state of Thailand was founded back in 1932. And no country has had more military coups over that period. So the Thai media are old hands at dealing with this kind of thing, figuring out where the red lines, the journalistic boundaries are. But the aftermath of this coup is proving to be particularly challenging. The government of the general-turned-prime minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha lifted martial law a month ago, but that hasn't really eased the pressure on journalists. Replacing martial law is something called Article 44, a so-called security law that journalists and human rights activists say is actually worse in some ways. The military junta has given itself the power to pull news reports off the air, shut down media outlets, tell editors what not to publish, and restrict online content if they so choose. Beyond Article 44, there's the challenge of reporting on the Prime Minister himself. He may have taken off the uniform, but he still seems to expect the news media to march in step. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the Thai media, the general, and the new rules.
Friday night in Thailand. If you're not out on a beach, at a club, at evening prayers in a temple, or still at work, then you can watch some TV. The Prime Minister has something he wants to say.
ซึ่งวันนี้เรามีความพร้อมที่จะเริ่มการปฏิรูปนะครับบ้านเมืองสงบร่มเย็นพอสมควรรัฐบาลมีเอกภาพในการบริหารงานแผ่นดิน
Unlike his predecessors, whose broadcasts went out only on government channels, Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha's weekly TV address, entitled Returning Happiness to the People, airs on all channels. The Friday evening primetime slot is probably one of the more relaxing media engagements for the Prime Minister. At press conferences, interactions with the media can often get testy.
I've been discussing this with my colleagues, and we think the problem is because he is from the military system. Also, I think General Prayuth is not used to being confronted with so many people shouting their different opinions. So when journalists ask certain questions, a person like the General, with his low boiling point, often gets confrontational.
His regime is obviously unnerved because an unfettered and free press in Thailand would immediately start asking questions about his government's legitimacy, which frankly is lacking considering how it came to power through an extra-constitutional coup. So that's one reason that he has taken such a pugnacious approach towards the media.
He's very direct and honest, a professional military man. But now that he has moved into the political arena, some members of the media who don't know him well are a little surprised. They report some of his words without capturing the context and the mood. For example, at one press conference, he had finished answering a question, but it was being repeated over and over again, and that upset him.
There's no hiding the fact that the Prime Minister and his government watch the media very closely and take it very seriously. Immediately after the coup in 2014, Pravit Rajanafruk, an outspoken columnist at The Nation, was arrested and held for 7 days and told not to write or say anything that might exacerbate the situation. Since then, the government has taken a different approach. The army keeps journalists in line through meetings known as Praptasana Khati. It translates to adjustment of attitude. There were 8 such meetings held in 2014. And then in March this year, a news report about Thai fishermen enslaved on Indonesian fishing boats aired on the privately operated Channel 3. The Prime Minister was furious.
I actually watched the news, and it was a very good piece. This female broadcast reporter by the name of Tapani Esisha, she traveled all the way to this little island in Indonesia where a group of Thai fishermen were arrested and forced into slavery. The report, after it came out, caused quite a stir.
This is just how blunt the Prime Minister is. If he reads an article or watches a report he doesn't agree with, he will just say so. Regarding the case of the Channel 3 report, he was concerned about national security and the impact on the country. Also, he wants news reports to be balanced and comprehensive.
Prayut's administration has taken great umbrage towards any reporting that indicates Thailand has a human trafficking problem. This is something that his government and the country has taken its lumps for from the United States and potentially economic sanctions. So the government has moved to try to suppress any news, pretty much blanket denials that this is a problem Thailand has.
The Prime Minister is worried and intends to solve the human slavery issue. He has always said he's open to hearing different opinions and ideas, but he doesn't want divisive opinions that can impact the country's security. And if some people break the line, then we can always have a session to talk.
That talk with the Channel 3 reporter took place just a few days before martial law was lifted. The army replaced it with a new law called Article 44. On the media, it says that the Prime Minister can, quote, prevent, disrupt or suppress any act which undermines public peace and order, national security, the monarchy, national economics, or administration of state affairs, whether that act emerges inside or outside the kingdom. So had the Channel 3 report on enslaved Thai fishermen aired after the lifting of martial law, the implications could have been worse.
Well, if the report had come out after the enforcement of Article 44, I think that program could be banned altogether. If we look into details of Article 44, we will see that it actually gives the Prime Minister sweeping powers to control the media.
If we were to abide by all the orders of the NCPO in Article 44, then we wouldn't be able to report anything. So, given how broad and vague the laws are, we are just going about our jobs as best as we can. If we self-censor, then we will never really know where the red lines are.
year since the military coup, the task of reconciliation and reform in Thailand is daunting. Political divisions run deep, the future of the monarchy is in question, and the economy is shaky. Amidst all this, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha seems to have decided that the media needs to be in his grip, or they might set off another round of mass protests.
When the Prime Minister took office, the government had to do something. It's been very stressful. In times like these, if the media presents only one side of the problems and neglects to mention what action the government has been taking, people could misunderstand and criticize us for not doing the work we've promised.
Everything we're seeing, frankly, is that this government, while talking about restoring democracy, is putting in place the strictures of a long-term police state, while constitution drafters are talking about putting in place democratic reforms. On the other side, the military is putting in place laws, restrictions, institutionalized threats that are very much meant to curb press freedom, not enhance.
Hopefully it will pass, and that's the most positive way of looking at it. But the most fearful thing is that we'll never return to where we actually were. And we have to wait a long time until those legislations could be amended again. Not losing hope, but it's a long ride, long and very bumpy ride ahead of us.
More voices on the download now on the new rules and red lines in Thailand.
The main problem seems to be that it remains unclear what exactly are the criteria for determining which media outlet or content is seditious and which is not. And as such, this form of censorship turns into a political tool in the hands of the regime itself.
Finally, the Pulitzer Prize is as prestigious as it gets for American print reporters, and this year's prize for local reporting went to a small paper called The Daily Breeze. It covers the south side of Los Angeles. Two reporters there, Rob Kuzina and Rebecca Kimmich, revealed a story about corruption at a local school board, money earmarked for education ending up in the wrong pockets. One superintendent named Jose Fernandez reportedly banked more than $600,000 in just 1 year. It was a good story, but for supporters of quality journalism in the community, it did not end well, because one of the reporters, Rob Kuzina, has since given up journalism for a job in public relations. Given the state of the news media these days, PR is just a safer career option. We asked him to go back into the newsroom so that he and his former colleagues could walk us through the story and also his decision, and he's one of many, to give up journalism for the world of PR. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
I was on the education beat for 3 years here in the South Bay. I wrote a story in like 2010. It didn't really gain any traction, but 3 years later, an insider that saw that story that I had written and said that it might be good to take another look.
We started to dig a little bit deeper in the district and found that it went far beyond Jose Fernandez. He kind of set the tone for a lot of our other folks who were also enriching themselves off of the district.
All the while, the school district was cutting programs in a district, serving a very high poverty, low performing student population, and laying off teachers by the dozen.
Local reporting, The Daily Breeze.
When we started this investigation, it was certainly not with any thoughts about awards in our heads. I mean, there was this crazy thing going on that needed to be revealed and needed to be uncovered.
I think the Pulitzer is a reminder that the kind of work local papers and all media oftentimes do can have tremendous positive effect.
And that's precisely what we did here, where we do watchdog journalism. We expose malfeasance in government and wrongdoing and bring it to light. Literally hundreds of journalists I've worked with over the years leave the business to pursue a more lucrative opportunity, many of them in public relations.
One thing I took for granted as a reporter is that a lot of my story just came from PR people. Now I feel like I'm on the other side of the equation. I've gone from batter to pitcher. I've learned that there are two sides to the equation here of telling stories in the public forum.
There's 5 or 6 things that journalists always talk about. We're talking about next big story, we're talking about how late we worked last night, how much we worked over the weekend, and right up there is what is your exit strategy.